It is your decisions, not your conditions, that determine your destiny, your decisions. And successful people, leaders, and all of us as individuals have to make decisions every day. Your decisions can make or mar you, okay? Life seems to make way for the person whose mind is made up. A lot of people don't make up their minds, and they don't realize that's why they don't succeed. Simply put, the reason why they've not become a particular kind of person is because they've not decided to become that kind of a person. Many people are not successful because they've not decided to be successful. Many are not prosperous because they have not decided to be prosperous. And I realize many people have not decided because they're trying to solve all the problems before they decide. They're trying to figure out all the how before they decide on what. And it doesn't work that way. The way we're designed as humans, we decide what, our system begins to scan to find the how and to deliver it to us. So it's the decision that determines the destiny. However, it is the quality of advice that determines the quality of the decision. In the first place, if you are someone that does not take advice from anyone, your potential for success is grossly limited. We've got to be open to good advice. The thing, however, is that we've got to be careful the kind of advice that we get. There is good advice and there is bad advice, like we see from the story that we shared earlier on. Now, if you're going to get advice from authentic people, honest people, people that are real, people that are not hypocritical, people that will not hide the truth from you. One of the basic things you realize about such people is that they are open to share their experiences and they're open to share knowledge. Some people hoard knowledge. They're so insecure, they think that somebody else's success is going to take away from theirs. And there are people like that in leadership positions. Okay? So there's no point seeking advice from someone that doesn't care enough about you to want you to succeed as much as they did. There's no point asking for advice from someone that is threatened by your potential success. They will mislead you. That's if they share anything at all. Okay? You know what I've learned along the line? A wise person said that a candle does not lose its own light by lighting another candle. That's the amazing thing about it. Actually, we get more light. Okay? So, you want to get advice from authentic people, from real people, from people that are vulnerable enough to share their own mistakes. If somebody is pretending to be perfect, just move away from them because they're not going to tell you the truth. They're not going to tell you their pain points. They're not going to share their struggles with you. And if they don't share their struggles with you, you won't know how to deal with your own struggles. There are loads of people in leadership positions that assume that being a leader means that your life has got to be perfect. Who said? Okay? The problem with that is that your success will not be repeatable because nobody's life is perfect. And the lives of your followers are not perfect. Okay? So when you see a leader that is pretentious like that, it's not likely that you'll get the truth from them on how they achieved their success. Ask advice from people that are willing to be vulnerable. Okay? There is a sense of assurance that comes to you when a successful person tells you they made mistakes. Okay? When a successful person tells you, I made mistakes in this area. This is what I did wrong. Okay? There's a sense in which it gives you some comfort, you know, and some assurance that in spite of your mistakes, you can still succeed. okay, that you can correct your mistakes and still make progress. Ask advice from authentic people, real people that are willing to be vulnerable, people that can talk about their mistakes with you, okay? Now, another important dimension to this. People say that you should be very careful about unsolicited advice. That is good advice. And you know what? Most of us get loads of unsolicited advice. It's amazing how we tend to have the solutions to the problems in other people's lives. Have you observed that? We tend to know exactly what somebody else is supposed to do to fix their issues. It's amazing, isn't it? I just observed it. It works like that. So a lot of the time, we have ideas about what somebody else should do. I've come to realize, though, a lot of the people that are trying to fix your life need to fix theirs first. They're serving you medicine that they have not taken. Because if they had taken their own advice, their own scenario should have been better than it is now. Why do people give unsolicited advice? Because it's easier, isn't it, to fix other people's lives than it is to fix one's own. Unsolicited advice a lot of the time is cheap. And sometimes the perspective is distorted. The person that is trying to advise you is not in your position and sometimes doesn't even fully understand what's going on, doesn't fully understand the scenario. That's why unsolicited advice can be irritating sometimes, can be annoying, because when the advice comes, you realize this person has no idea what's going on. Some of the person, the person is making assumptions. The person is making assumptions, and some of those assumptions are wrong, okay? Some of the things they're advising you to fix, you fixed already. In fact, sometimes they think there's a problem somewhere and there's no problem there. That's not the real issue. Okay, so unsolicited advice sometimes can be just so flimsy, lack value. Please protect your life. Okay? Protect your life. It's not everyone that gives you advice that is competent enough to advise you. Some of them don't even know where you are going. Some don't recognize your value, okay, as a person. So be very careful about unsolicited advice. Let me go contrarian. Unsolicited advice is not always bad. So be open to unsolicited advice sometimes. That seems to conflict, isn't it? No, it doesn't. The point still stands that you should be wary for unsolicited advice. However, it is not all the time that unsolicited advice is not good. Sometimes someone cares enough about you to give you advice, and the person is competent enough to give you that advice. And the challenge is that for some reason, you just may never get to ask the person for advice. Okay? So you ask, what's the difference? How do I make the difference between the unsolicited advice to take and the one to not take? Check the motive of the person that is giving the advice and their competence to give that advice. See, the first thing I said was for you to be wary of unsolicited advice, and that should stand most of the time, because a lot of the time that people give unsolicited advice, they give it for selfish reasons, not because they genuinely care about you. Listen, when you give someone advice, you've got to do it with caution. Because at the end of the day, they suffer the consequences of their decisions, not you. So a smart person would be very, very careful in giving advice. When you are suffering the consequences of their advice, they won't be there. See? So the fact that you are the one that will suffer the consequences, that's the more the reason why you should be very careful before you take the advice. What is in this decision for them? Sometimes we get advice from various sources, okay? And we tend to disregard the advice coming from people that are closest to us. When my wife gives me advice, for example, I pay attention. She's not an expert in every subject. She is not always right. But the reality is that she suffers the consequences of my mistakes. Okay? She has something to gain and she has something to lose in the decisions that I make. She's a stakeholder. That's completely different from that of somebody who, if I bungle a project or I run into debt or I have a problem, it won't touch them, it won't affect them in any way. Those are two different levels. So a lot of the time when people give us unsolicited advice, they're giving it because of their own ego. They're giving it because there's something in it for them. That's what you and I need to be very, very sensitive about. Yes, we need to be very, very sensitive to that. We need to be very careful. The person that is giving unsolicited advice, why are they giving the advice? Check the motive. And then remember, like I said, that there are people that give unsolicited advice, and that unsolicited advice can be a game changer for us. Don't discard every unsolicited advice. Sometimes unsolicited advice can be powerful. Don't let your prejudices affect whose advice you take. How do I mean? Sometimes we have prejudices. It may be across gender lines. It may be across religious lines. It may be across ethnic or tribal lines. See, the problem there is that your best advice, your best piece of advice may be coming from someone that belongs to a class of people that you don't like. What do? If you reject advice, or you skip advice, or you fail to seek for advice simply because you don't like a particular kind of people, it's your loss, not theirs. Some people don't want to take advice from young people because the question for them is, what do you know? I've seen life. I've been around here for a long time, okay? So we don't want to take advice from young people. Yet sometimes, some of the best pieces of advice have come from people. I mean, I've had our kids give me advice on my job. And sincerely speaking, some of those pieces of advice have been game-changing pieces of advice. It's amazing. Game-changing pieces of advice. Because I listen to the kids and I'm the one that paid their school fees. You know, listen, if your child gives you a good piece of advice that really makes sense and adds value, you know, to what you're doing or to the quality of your decisions, that's what you paid for. That's the essence of the tuition that you paid. That's a return on your investment. Don't let your pride stand on the way of that. Don't let your prejudice stand on the way of that. Okay, so it's really important that we be open to advice. I always remember the story of an architect, an engineer that were having a conversation in an elevator. You know, in the United States, the elevator had become insufficient for the building. And, you know, they were coming down the floors in the elevator, and there was a cleaner in the elevator. And they were discussing and racking their brains on how to solve the problem. And when they got to ground floor and came out, the cleaner said, "Excuse me, sirs, I overheard your conversation." Okay, so you're wondering how to fit a bigger elevator into this space. How about you build, since we still have some land, you just build another stairwell or elevator well, yeah, another elevator well right next to this one on the outside. And the architect and engineer looked at each other. That was a breakthrough idea. That was what they did, and it came from a cleaner. So if you're class conscious, you have prejudices over class issues, you don't talk to poor people or you don't talk to your subordinates in the office, you may miss out on some good quality advice. Let me say this to those of us that are leaders. Some of the most effective feedback that we are going to get will come from junior officers, people that interact directly with our customers. They get direct feedback. They know exactly how the customers feel. They know their pain points. I don't know why, but some people think that the best innovative ideas in an organization have to come from the top of the organization. Who said? So some of the most useful advice sometimes for cutting costs, for increasing profitability, for improving customer satisfaction will come from the lower ranks of our organization. So this is my point. If you are going to get good advice, you've got to be a humble person. Once you become unteachable, you're on your way out. Because some of the best pieces of advice that you will get will come from your subordinates. Nobody knows everything. And I hope, dear viewer, that right now you're reviewing some of the things that have happened before and some of the opportunities you've had to get good advice. I want to believe that this season, your success will gain acceleration and your promotion will come more rapidly.